Okay, continuing on talking about the immune system, we're going to talk next about the second line of defense. So let's say some pathogens, some bacteria or viruses get past our skin and our mucous membranes. They get into our body. The first thing that's going to happen is this reaction called inflammation. Once infected, our white blood cells, we're going to call them leukocytes, that's the name of them, they're going to respond. Some of them respond by releasing chemicals. These chemicals are called histamines. So you may have heard of an antihistamine. An antihistamine makes those stop. So they keep you from having some of these effects of inflammation. But these histamines increase blood flow to the area. They bring more white blood cells, which is very important because it's going to help fight off these pathogens. But the increased blood flow will cause redness, swelling, fever, and pain. So if you've ever had some kind of an infection in your hand or on your leg or something, you know that there is often redness, swelling, fever. It gets warm in the area, and also pain. That's a sign that something's infecting you. Leukocytes, these white blood cells, also come and just destroy the pathogen. There are special cells that come in, and if you have chronic inflammation, it goes on for a long period of time, that's a signal that there might be some kind of a disease. So there are some diseases that are caused by having too much inflammation, and it can be a bad thing. So here's a little summary of the inflammatory response. We have increased blood flow to the area. The white blood cells are going to release these chemicals, these histamines, and then some of them also will go and gobble up the pathogens. In this case, it looks like bacteria. Now, our third line of defense is the immune response. In the immune response, it takes a little longer to respond, but when it does, it responds in a very specific way. It understands the pathogen a lot better. It's not just a general overall inflammation response. There are specialized leukocytes called lymphocytes, and it's the lymphocytes that can actually recognize the pathogen that's infecting you. On the pathogen, there are these proteins called antigens, and the antigens act as markers, and it's like a name tag. It identifies those cells as being foreign and not belonging to the body and some kind of infection. And so those lymphocytes can recognize those. There are specialized ones. There are killer T lymphocytes that go and destroy, eat up, gobble up, destroy everything. Then there are helper T lymphocytes. These are extremely important cells because the helper T cells actually release chemicals that help communicate between all the different kinds of white blood cells and tell each white blood cell what to do. The helper T cells are kind of in charge of the immune response. They tell all the other cells what they're supposed to be doing. Then you have the B lymphocytes, and the B cells make specific antibodies. This is very important, the antibodies. The antibodies are specific proteins that can effectively destroy the pathogen. The antibodies are specific to the antigen. That means they match up with that antigen. They're a matched pair. So these B lymphocytes, these B cells, can go in, recognize, and destroy the pathogen. What's cool about the B cells is that some of them become what's called memory cells. And the memory cells remember that you saw that pathogen before. And if you're ever infected again with that pathogen, they will immediately activate and destroy. So that's why they say you can't get sick with the same thing more than once. When you're infected with a virus, you only get it once because your immune system remembers what it saw before and it will immediately attack it so you don't get sick. So here are some of the white blood cells I talked about. We have our B cells that make antibodies and become memory cells. We have macrophages that eat up the pathogens. They gobble, gobble, gobble them up. And then we have our killer T cells that can destroy the pathogen. Now, lastly, I want to talk a little bit about vaccines. Vaccines, what they are is they help protect you against infection by pathogens because they actually give you a little bit of the pathogen in a low dose or in an inactivated version of the pathogen. It's enough to trigger the response. So your body responds as though you've been infected. It's not enough to really make you sick. It's just a little bit. It's just a little bit of it. It's either inactivated so it won't make you sick, or it's just this tiny little dose that, you might feel a little crummy the day you get the shot, but after that you don't really get sick, And what happens is your body remembers that. Those memory cells kick in, and they remember that. So if you ever come into contact again with that virus, you don't get sick. So they give vaccines for, gosh, what do they give vaccines for? Mumps and measles and whooping cough and polio and all these things that normally would make you very, very sick. You don't get sick with these anymore. Lastly, let's talk about antibiotics. Antibiotics are prescribed if you're infected with a bacteria only. Bacteria respond to antibiotics, viruses do not. So if you have a cold or the flu, antibiotics aren't going to help you. They only help if you have something that's bacterial. Like if you had pneumonia, you would need antibiotics, or bronchitis. Bronchitis, you need antibiotics. The problem is, of course, they've been overprescribing. They've been overusing antibiotics in a lot of places, and now some bacteria are becoming resistant to the antibiotics, and we're looking all the time for new drugs that we can take to fight them off.